The buckboard listed hard to the left on the last stretch of road, and Mae Hollis gripped the bench with both hands and told herself it did not matter. She had survived worse than a bad road. She had survived a fire that took the house, a winter that took her father, and a spring flood that took what little the winter had left behind. A rutted track in eastern Colorado was not going to be the thing that finished her. She was 24 years old. She had $11.30 folded inside her boot, a carpet bag wedged between her feet, and a letter of introduction she had written herself on the back of a general store receipt, because there had been no one left to write it for her. The driver, a sun-cracked man from Pueblo who went by the name of Garrett, pulled the team to a stop at the top of a rise and pointed with his chin. "Aldridge spread," he said. "Down there." She looked. The valley below was wide and spare, the kind of beauty that asked nothing of you and gave nothing back. A creek threaded through it, silver in the afternoon light, and along its bank the cottonwoods had gone pale gold with the season. The ranch house sat on a low bench above the floodplain, solid, two-story, built of stone on the ground floor and timber above, with a long porch that faced south. Behind it, the barn was enormous, painted a deep red that had faded to rust at the edges, and beyond that, the corrals through them like slow dark water. It was not what she had expected. She had expected something smaller. She had something that needed her. She squared her shoulders and said, "All right." Garrett clicked to the horses and they started down. The yard was hard-packed clay, and a dog lifted its head from the porch steps and watched them come in without any particular alarm. A hand moving hay near the barn looked up and went back to work. The place had the quiet industry of somewhere that ran on its own momentum, that did not require witnesses. A man came out of the barn as the wagon rolled to a stop. He was older than she'd pictured. Somewhere past 40, she thought, though the sun and the work made it hard to say. He was lean rather than broad, the lean of a man worn down to his essential parts, and he moved with the unhurried economy of someone who had long since made his peace with the size of the work ahead of him. His face was all planes and angles, burned the color of old saddle leather, and the gray at his temples had spread far enough to meet in the back. He looked at her once. Direct, brief, the way you'd assess the weather. "Miss Hollis," he said. It was not a question. His voice was flat and dry like the country around them. "Mr. Aldridge." She climbed down before Garrett could offer assistance. She had her bag in hand before her feet hit the ground. "I appreciate you seeing me." Letter was straightforward, he said. He meant her letter of introduction. She had kept it simple. Her name, her situation, her skills. She had not described the situation in full, because the full description would have taken more paper than she had. What she had written, "My father, Thomas Hollis, ran a cattle operation near Lamar for 11 years. I managed his accounts and correspondence for the last 4 of those years. He died this past January. I am looking for a position that makes use of those skills. I am not looking for charity." What she had not written, the fire had been an accident, a lamp knocked over in the barn by a horse startled by something in the dark. By the time anyone knew, the south pasture fence was gone, and the barn with it, and the house caught from a burning fence post carried on the wind. She had stood in the road in her nightgown and watched it go. She had not cried then, she had not cried since, which she suspected was not entirely healthy, but she had not found the time. "Come in," said Cal Aldridge, and turned toward the house. She followed him. Garrett had already turned the wagon around. The kitchen was the first room she saw, and she saw it the way she saw everything now, with a quick cataloging eye that was always measuring, always assessing what was needed and what could be done. The floor was clean. The stove was good iron, well kept. The table was heavy oaks, big enough for 4 or 5, though only 2 chairs were pulled close. A set of curtains hung in the window that someone had put up a long time ago and no one had replaced. They were faded to a uniform pale, the original color completely surrendered. A boy sat at the table. He was perhaps 10, with serious eyes and a smear of something, grease or mud, across his left cheekbone. He was working at a piece of tack with an awl, the focused frown of someone who had been shown once and was determined not to ask again. "My nephew," Cal said. "Teddy." Teddy looked up. He examined her with the frank evaluation of a child who has not yet learned to disguise his assessments. Then he looked back at his work. "Teddy," Cal said. "Ma'am," Teddy said without looking up. Cal turned to her. "The arrangement is a fair wage and room and board. You manage the household accounts and the correspondence. The operation accounts as well, if you've the skill for it." He said it plainly, as if he expected her to flinch. "I'll not have anyone touching those books who doesn't know what they're doing." "I know what I'm doing," Mae said. He looked at her for a moment. Then, "Room is at the top of the stairs, east side. Teddy, show Miss Hollis where things are." And that was the interview. He went back outside. She stood in the kitchen a moment after he left, letting the quiet settle around her. Then she turned to Teddy, who had set down his awl and was watching her with something that might, in a year or two, become friendliness. "Where are the account books?" she asked. He blinked. "Don't you want to see your room first?" "After," she said. Something shifted in the boy's expression. Not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. He pushed back his chair. "They're in the study," he said. "Come on." The room was small and clean and faced the morning. There was a window that looked east toward a distant line of bluffs, and in the evenings she could sit on the narrow sill and watch the sky go from gold to purple to the deep, absolute dark of the plains. She had not expected to find the dark restful. She did. She had not expected a great many things about the Aldridge ranch. She had not expected Cal to set a place for her at the table that first evening without comment, without ceremony, as if it had always been there, and she had simply been late to occupy it. She had assumed, from experience, a brief position in Pueblo with a dry goods merchant's family, where she had eaten in the kitchen after the children were in bed, that she would take her meals separately. The assumption was so fixed in her that when Cal pulled out the chair across from his own and waited, she stood in the doorway for a full 3 seconds. Before understanding what was being offered, he did not explain it. He did not make it gracious or notable. He simply waited, and when she sat, he sat, and Teddy sat, and they ate the meal she had made. Roasted chicken and early squash and cornbread from the pan, in a silence that was, she slowly realized, not unfriendly. It was just the silence of people who did not talk for the sake of talking. She had been that kind of person once, before the fire, before the months of explaining herself to banks and neighbors, and distant relatives who all wanted to know what she was going to do now. Here, no one asked what she was going to do. She was already doing it. The account books were as bad as she had feared, and as she had suspected from the moment she saw the study. Papers stacked in no discernible order, a good quality ledger that had been abandoned in favor of loose sheets, invoices tucked into books on the shelves like forgotten bookmarks. Cal Aldridge was meticulous about his cattle and his land. He was not meticulous about numbers. He was not meticulous about. She suspected he avoided them, the way some men avoided doctors, knowing the news was unlikely to be good. She worked 3 evenings organizing before she understood the whole shape of the problem. Then she worked 1 more evening making sure she understood it correctly, because she did not want to be wrong. Then she went to find him. He was on the porch, as he often was at that hour, the lamp still burning in the parlor behind him, and the sky overhead gone to stars. Teddy was inside, She could hear him shuffling toward his room. She sat in the other chair. There were two, she had noticed early on, and the second one had a thin cushion on it, which seemed significant, as if someone had once anticipated company. And she put the ledger on the small table between them. "You have a problem," she said. He looked at the ledger. "Tell me." She did. She laid it out the way her father had taught her, which was to say all the facts first, without softening or apology, and then to explain what options existed. The timber lease that had come due in September had not been paid. The amount was $240. It had been automatically extended at a penalty rate, which meant that if it was not settled before the end of November, the rate would double again. Cal had the money, barely, but only if he liquidated the small herd he'd been holding back for spring sale. Selling now, in October, would get him fair to poor prices. Waiting cost him money he didn't have. Cal listened without interrupting. His hands rested on the arms of the chair, still. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then, "How short are we if we wait?" She had the number ready, $65, assuming no other expenses. Another silence. "The Monroe brothers," he said, finally, "owe me for 3 horses. I've not pressed them." "How much?" "50. She pulled the ledger toward her and wrote it in. "That closes most of the gap. There's a hay sale I've been putting off. Man over in Simla wants a quantity of what's in the north barn. I wasn't sure we could spare it." She looked at him. "Can you?" "If the winter's mild." She considered this. Outside, a coyote called from somewhere on the bluff, one long descending note, and then silence. "I'd rather have the money than bet on the weather," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Something crossed his face that she could not quite read in the dark. Then he made a sound that was not quite a laugh, more like a breath that had humor in it. "Fair enough," he said. She wrote the hay sale in as pending. The numbers still didn't fully close, but they were close enough that she could see the shape of a solution. She stayed up after Cal went in, working through combinations, running the columns 3 times to be certain. By the time the lamp guttered, she had a plan that would work. It was not comfortable, but it was sound. She allowed herself, very briefly, to feel something she had not felt in almost a year. It was not happiness, exactly. It was closer to usefulness. The specific satisfaction of a problem that yields to patient pressure, the way a stiff latch yields if you know the right angle. She closed the ledger and went to bed. The confrontation came on a Friday, the first week of November, when the cold had settled in for good and the cottonwoods along the creek had gone bare. Cal and Teddy had ridden out before dawn to move a portion of the herd to the south pasture, where the grass still held some nutrition under the frost. Mae was in the kitchen making bread, her hands deep in dough, the smell of yeast and warmth filling the small house, when she heard the rider. She heard him before she saw him, the particular self-assured pace of a horse ridden by someone unaccustomed to arriving and being paid attention to. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the window. The man who dismounted in the yard was perhaps 50, well-dressed for the country, with a coat that had been expensive once, and a hat that still was. He had the soft jaw and the deliberate posture of a man who had spent the last 20 years behind a desk. And his eyes, when he turned toward the house and found her at the window, were the flat, assessing eyes of someone doing arithmetic. She knew who he was before he opened his mouth. She had seen his name in the correspondence, in the timber lease, in a series of letters that had grown gradually more pointed over the past 4 years. Mr. Vernon Oakes, the agent for the Devereaux Land and Timber Company, which held the lease on the north quarter of the Aldridge ranch, and had, she had discovered, been quietly misdating the payment invoices, sending them late, so that they arrived after the penalty period had already technically begun, then crediting the payments as late even when Cal had paid promptly. It was not dramatic fraud. It was the slow, patient kind, the kind designed to be unnoticeable, until the accumulated penalties became a number too large to manage. She had found it in the dates. 3 years of invoices, all arriving a few days after the window closed. She had been sitting on this knowledge for 10 days, composing her response with the same care she gave to everything she did not want to do badly. She went to the door before he could knock. "Miss," he said, his voice carrying the mild surprise of a man who had expected something other than what he found. "I'm here to see Calvin Aldridge." "He's not available," Mae said. "I manage the ranch accounts. You can speak with me." Vernon Oakes took a breath and smiled the kind of smile that men used when they wanted to seem patient. "This is a matter of some complexity. I'd prefer to wait for Aldridge himself." "You may wait if you like," she said, "but Mr. Aldridge will tell you to speak to me regardless. So you're welcome to waste the time, or we can conduct our business now. It's a cold morning." He looked at her. Then he came onto the porch. "The timber lease," he said. "Payment is overdue." "I know," Mae said. "It's why I wanted to speak with you." She had the folder ready. She had moved it to the kitchen table that morning, as if she'd known, or perhaps because a part of her had been ready for this moment since she first found the pattern in the dates. She set it on the porch railing between them and opened it. "This is the payment history for the past 3 years, she said. "These are the dates the payments were sent from this ranch." She pointed. "And these are the dates the invoices were received by Mr. Aldridge." She moved her finger. "And these are the dates the Devereaux Company has recorded as the payment dates." She let him look. "There's a discrepancy of 3 to 5 days. Consistently, across 14 separate transactions, the payments were sent on time. They were recorded as late." Oakes said nothing. His face had gone very still. "I've written to the Territorial Land Office," she continued, her voice as steady as if she were reading a grocery list. "I've included copies of all of these documents. I've also written to the Devereaux Home Office in Kansas City." She paused. "I should mention that I grew up near Lamar, and my father knew Arthur Devereaux's son-in-law fairly well. I've taken the liberty of writing to him also." The silence on the porch was very complete. Somewhere in the barn, a horse stamped. Oakes cleared his throat. "There may have been some clerical errors." "I'm sure there were," Mae said. "I'm sure it was all clerical errors. What I've asked the land office to determine is the sum that would be owed to Mr. Aldridge if the corrected payment dates are applied retroactively. I expect that sum to be credited against the current balance." She paused. "In fact, I expect it to substantially eliminate the current balance." Oakes looked at her for a long moment. He was not a foolish man, she could see that. He was a man doing a calculation, the same kind of calculation she did, every night. By lamplight, only his was about exposure and risk, and the cost of pushing forward against someone who clearly had the receipts. "I'll need to review these figures," he said at last. "Of course," Mae said. "I'll have copies made for you." She closed the folder. "In the meantime, I'd ask you to convey to the Devereaux Company that any communication regarding this lease should come to me in writing. Mr. Aldridge is a busy man, and I handle his correspondence." Oakes picked up his hat, which he had removed at some point without her noticing. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't entirely categorize, somewhere between irritation and a grudging, reluctant respect. "You've made yourself very clear, Miss Hollis," she said. "Miss Hollis." He set his hat back on. "Good day." She watched him ride out, his horse's pace markedly less self-assured going than it had been coming in. Then she went back inside, sat down at the kitchen table, and put both hands flat on the surface and breathed for a moment. Her hands were perfectly steady. She noted this with some surprise and then picked up the bread dough, which had risen beautifully while she was otherwise occupied, and got back to work. What country are you stories find you? I always love to know where these stories find you. Now, let's get back to the ranch. Cal and Teddy came in at dusk, cold-cheeked and quiet with the particular exhaustion of a good day's hard work. Cal saw the prints in the yard, the single horse that had come and gone, and he stood looking at them for a moment before he came inside. Mae had a pot of beef stew on the stove and fresh bread on the board, and the kitchen was warm in a way that had nothing to do with temperature, or maybe everything to do with it. Cal pulled off his coat and hung it without speaking. He washed his hands at the basin. He looked at the folder still on the table. "Who came?" he said. It was not a question. It rarely was, with him. "Vernon Og," she said. His jaw tightened. He sat down slowly, the way a man sits when he is preparing to absorb something unpleasant. What did he want? To discuss the lease payment. She ladled stew into bowls. I told him about the clerical errors in the payment records. Cal was quiet. I also told him I'd notified the land office and the Devereaux home office. She set a bowl in front of him, and Arthur Devereaux's son-in-law, who my father knew. He was not, I think, expecting any of that. She sat down across from him. Teddy was already eating, apparently unbothered by any of this, or perhaps just very hungry. Cal looked at his bowl, then he looked at her. "You know Arthur Devereaux's son-in-law? My father played cards with him 3 times, Mae said. I wrote him a letter. He may remember my father's name, he may not. Either way, the letter will arrive." Something happened in Cal's face. It was not a smile exactly. She had come to understand that his face did not move easily in that direction. But there was something in the set of his mouth and the steadiness of his eyes that she had begun to recognize. It was the expression he wore when Teddy did something well and quietly, without needing to be told. It was the expression he wore when a sick animal recovered and he found it standing in the morning. It was, she was slowly learning, what appreciation looked like on a face that had learned not to spend it cheaply. "The lease," he said, "should be credited to 0 once the corrected dates are applied," she said. "I expect confirmation by the end of the month." He picked up his spoon. He ate 2 bites. Then, without looking up, "Your father taught you well." It was the most he had ever said about anything personal. Her throat tightened briefly. She kept her voice even. "He did," she said. They ate the rest of the meal in their ordinary silence, and the silence was warm. November passed into December, and the cold came down in earnest. The kind that turned the mud to iron and frosted the inside of the windows at night. Mae found a rhythm that suited her, a dailiness that she had not expected to feel like anything other than work, but did not. The accounts came to order under her hands. Cal began asking her questions, not only about the numbers but about the ranch, about what she saw when she looked at the operation from the outside. As someone who had grown up inside a different one, she told him what she thought, and he listened with the serious attention of a man who had decided her opinion was worth having. They sat at the kitchen table, after Teddy went to bed most nights, sometimes working, sometimes simply sitting with the lamp between them and the stove ticking in the cold. He was not an easy man to know. He did not give himself away in language, but she had grown up with a quiet father, and she had learned to read the other vocabulary. The way a man set down a coffee cup, the particular stillness when he was listening versus when he had already made up his mind, the involuntary softening around the eyes when something pleased him that his mouth refused to acknowledge. She read Cal Aldridge the way she read his accounts, patiently, carefully, attending to what was actually there and not what she'd assumed would be. What was actually there surprised her. Confirmation came from the Devereaux land office on the 14th of December, a letter, formal and precisely worded, acknowledging that a review of the payment records had identified administrative discrepancies, and that upon correction, the current balance of the Aldridge timber lease stood at 0. Vernon Oakes's name did not appear in the letter, but she had not expected it to. Men like Oakes rarely appeared in the letters that corrected their mistakes. She read it twice at the kitchen table, then set it down and sat for a moment in the particular silence of something being over. When Cal came in for the midday meal, she had the letter waiting beside his plate. He read it without expression. When he finished, he set it down on the table, with the same deliberate care he set down everything, and he looked at her. "It's done," she said. "Yes." He looked at the letter again. "What did it cost you to find this?" She had not expected that question. It was the right question, but she had not expected it from him, or not so directly. "Time," she said. "Attention. A few stamps." She thought about the nights, the lamp, the careful column of dates compared against dates, the sinking feeling when the pattern became undeniable, and the cold anger that had followed. "My father always said the numbers tell you what happened if you'll let them. You just have to listen." Cal was quiet for a moment. "Your father," he said, "must have been a good man." "He was," she said. "He was not very much with words either." She had not meant to say that last part. It had come out before she considered it. She looked at him carefully, uncertain how he would take it. He looked back at her, and then, the thing his face did not do easily, he smiled, small and brief and entirely real. "No," he said, "I expect he wasn't." The winter deepened and the ranch contracted to itself the way ranches do in the cold months, smaller, closer, more interior. There were evenings of lamplight and the sound of wind at the windows, and Teddy's boots on the stairs, and there were mornings of early dark and frozen troughs and the work that did not stop for weather. Mae found she did not mind any of it. She had been afraid, before coming here, that she would feel the absence of her own place too sharply, that she would always be occupying borrowed space, doing borrowed work, living adjacent to someone else's life. She did not feel that way. She was not entirely sure when that had changed. She thought about it one evening in January, sitting at the kitchen table, with the accounts spread before her and the house quiet around her. Teddy was asleep. Cal was mending harness in the near barn, a lamp burning in there too, its light a faint orange square in the dark. She could see it from the window when she looked up. She looked up more than was strictly necessary. She had come here with $11.30 and a letter she had written herself. She had come here because there was nowhere else to go, and this was at least somewhere. She had expected to be tolerated. She had expected to be used for the skills she had and otherwise overlooked. She had not expected to be seen. It was the small things, and it was all of them together. The chair that waited. The questions that expected real answers. The evening Cal had come in from the north pasture with a cut on his forearm and had, without any particular fanfare, handed her the supply kit from the shelf and sat down and let her clean and bind it without saying anything at all. As if it were simply understood that she was a person whose help was worth having, as if she had always been that. She had been trying not to think about what that meant. She was doing a poor job of it. He came to her in early February, on an evening when the cold had broken slightly and the sky had gone to the soft dark blue of almost thaw. She was on the porch, which was unusual. She rarely stood still in the cold, but something about the light had stopped her when she went out to bring in a crate, and she had stood there, watching the color drain from the western sky. She heard his step on the porch boards. He stood beside her, not close, and looked at the same sky. They stood like that for a moment. "Miss Hollis," he said. Something in his tone made her pay attention to him rather than the sky. He was looking straight ahead, his hands at his sides. I need to say something, he said. And I'm likely to say it poorly, so I'll ask you to hear it through before you respond. All right, she said. He was quiet for a moment. She had learned to wait for that. When I put the advertisement in the paper, he said, I was looking for someone to handle the books and write the letters. That was all I was looking for. Someone competent. A pause. You are more than competent. She said nothing. You came here with nothing, he said, and inside of 3 months, you had straightened accounts that I had let go to ruin for 4 years, and you faced down Vernon Oaks in my yard, and you wrote to a man in Kansas City and called his bluff with a letter and 3 years of receipts. He stopped. I watched you do all of that. I know, she said. I'm a slow man, he said. You know that. Yes. I take a long time to be sure of things. He turned then and looked at her. In the dim light his face was difficult to read, but she had learned to read it, and what she found there was not difficult at all. I am sure of this. Mae looked at him. The cold air was very still. I am not asking you to stay as my bookkeeper, he said. I am asking you to stay as the other half of this place, the other name on everything that matters. He paused. I am asking if you will marry me. The question sat between them in the quiet. She had not let herself expect this. She had been careful, very careful, not to expect it, because she had learned what it cost to want things you were not certain you could have. She had wanted to stay. She had known that for weeks, perhaps longer, and had kept it at a useful distance. In the same way she kept a difficult column of numbers visible on the ledger, but did not add them up until she was ready. She was ready. I was beginning to think, she said, that I would have to wait until spring. He made the sound again, the one that was almost a laugh, rough and warm and real. It's possible I've been thinking about it since October, he said. I wanted to be sure. You could have mentioned it. I could have, he agreed. He did not apologize for not doing so. She did not expect him to. It was who he was, and she had chosen that too. She reached out and put her hand over his where it rested on the porch railing. His hand was very warm. Yes, she said, I'll stay. They married in March when the first green was coming back into the grass and the creek ran high with snowmelt. It was a small ceremony at the church in town, attended by most of the neighbors, and apparently all of the county, since word had gotten around, as it always did, and people turned out for it, the way people turn out for the things that feel, collectively, like they ought to be witnessed. And Cindy. Teddy stood beside Cal, with his hair combed, and his boots polished, and his expression throughout was one of profound concentration, as if he had been assigned a job and intended to do it correctly. He did it correctly. Mae wore a dress she had made from wool, the color of slate, which was more practical and more herself than white would have been, and she carried a small bunch of dried grasses and prairie flowers she had found, pressed in a book in the study, left there by someone whose name she would never know. Mr. Harlan Webb, who ran the general store and had sold her stamps for the letters to Kansas City and the land office, and the Devereaux son-in-law, stood in the front row and looked as pleased as if he had arranged the whole thing himself. Perhaps in some small way he had. He had been the one to show her the original advertisement for the position 9 months, and what felt like a different life ago. They said their vows in the particular serious way of people who mean each word, and when Cal's hand closed around hers, it closed with the same certainty with which he did everything, unhurried and complete. 5 years later, on a morning in early May, Mae sat at the kitchen table with the ranch ledgers open before her and a cup of coffee she had let go cold, watching through the window while Cal showed Teddy. 15 now, broad-shouldered and serious, his uncle's face in the making, how to assess the soundness of a fence post by the way it held under pressure. The lesson was not about the fence post, she knew. It was about everything Cal had learned and was learning to pass on. A girl of 4 sat on the kitchen floor behind her, arranging small stones in a pattern that had its own internal logic, explaining it to no one in particular. A boy of 2 was asleep in the next room, his breathing audible in the quiet. The numbers on the ledger were good. They had been good for years now, which still felt, sometimes, like something she had made up. She remembered the shape of the problem she had found in those first weeks. The invoices, the penalties, the narrowing window, the way you remembered a fever, with the specific discomfort of a thing you had been through and come out the other side of. She closed the ledger and went to the door. Cal saw her and said something to Teddy, who nodded with the seriousness of someone being trusted with something. Cal walked back toward the house, his stride easy and unhurried, the way it always was. The same stride she had watched through the kitchen window for 5 years and had not yet got tired of watching. He came up onto the porch and stopped beside her, looking out at the same thing she was looking at. The yard, the corral, the barn with its rust-red boards, the line of cottonwoods, along the creek, gone new green with the season. Vernon Oakes sold his agency, he said. Heard it from Harlan this morning. Apparently the Devereaux Company let him go 2 years back. I know, Mae said. Harlan told me in January. Cal looked at her. I thought it would keep, she said. He shook his head once, slowly. She could not tell if it was disbelief or something more like wonder. After 5 years, sometimes she still could not tell. She had come to think it was the same thing. He put his hand over hers, where it rested on the porch rail. His hand was calloused and warm and certain, the hand of a man who had long ago decided what he was holding on to. He came here thinking we had nothing left, she said, that there was nothing to fight back with. We had you, Cal said. It was for him a speech. She turned her hand over and held his. In the yard, Teddy laughed at something, a short, unguarded sound. The laugh of someone who has forgotten for a moment to be careful and found the forgetting pleasant. The girl inside resumed her explanation of the stones to her invisible audience. The boy slept on. That was the thing about a life built quietly, out of patience and clear-eyed work, and the willingness to see what was actually in front of you, and not merely what you had expected to find. It did not announce itself. It did not arrive like a storm, all wind and spectacle. It arrived like this: a warm morning, a ledger balanced, a hand over hers, the ordinary, extraordinary weight of a life that was, against all the evidence of a harder season, fully and completely hers.